Sadly, this morning, there was a terrible school shooting. This seems to be getting more and more frequent. I have some comments I'd like to make about that. I've spoken to 1.2 million teenagers across America in hundreds of schools. I saw a statistic some time back. I hope that it's not correct, but it said 88% of teenagers in high schools today have never been to a single formal worship service, be it Protestant, Catholic, or Jewish. 88%. I also noticed something else. The California State University did a study of teenagers and the influence of television on the teenage population. They found that by the time a student had completed elementary school, he will have seen 8,000 murders on television. By the time that child reaches the age of 18, from the time he was a kindergartner until he's 18, he will have seen on television alone over 200,000 acts of violence. What's the influence of Bible reading and prayer being taken out of schools? What effect has it had on American society? Well, that act, I think a bad act by the government to take prayer and Bible reading out, was done in 1962. Since that time, the arrest of teens has jumped 150%. Of those teens aged 15 to 19, suicide has jumped 450%. Illegal drug activity has risen 6,000%, and violent crime has jumped 350%. Now, I'm not saying that taking prayer and Bible reading out of schools was the sole reason for all of these horrendous numbers, but surely it had an effect. Now, what can we do? Number one, we ought to pray. Many years ago, my crusade team was in a city that was having trouble in the schools. And we began a campaign to have people put signs in their yards and in their businesses that at 9 o'clock in the morning, every morning, there'd be a moment of prayer for the teachers in the schools in that city. And after 5 years, it was noted that everything had dropped in terms of vandalism and crime and rape and killing to almost nothing. So we ought to pray. And then I think we ought to preach. Why is it the American pulpit has grown so silent on sermons like hell and judgment and sin? Those were staple subjects when I was growing up. Preachers of all denominations preached that message, that we needed to live a holy life, and there was a penalty to be paid if we decided to get into sin. But in our modern trendy churches, nowadays it's considered negative preaching. Well, it may be negative preaching, but in the Bible, God had as many thou shalt nots as he had thou shalts. We ought to pray, and then we ought to preach, and then thirdly, I think we ought to prepare. You can pass all the gun laws you want to pass or pass none of them. It doesn't really matter. That's not going to stop violent crime in schools. I think there's one very simple way to prepare. Just put metal detectors at the entrances of every school. Why is it that if you go into many government buildings, particularly those that have judges and juries, you have metal detection? Or you get onto airplanes, you have metal detection. I think every school be a relatively small cost when you think about all the lives that will be protected. Put those at the entrances and you'll have adequate preparation. You say, well, I don't think schools ought to be that way. There are a lot of things I don't think ought to be the way they are in life. But I do think for the sake of our children, we ought to start praying more, preaching more about judgment and sin and the cost of it all. And thirdly, we ought to prepare. My motto is in this situation as it is in much of life. We need to pray like it all depends on God and work like it all depends on us, and then we'll have a good outcome. Thank you. This is Evangelist Harold Hunter. This has been Sermon in Miniature. If you appreciate my comments, please subscribe. It costs you nothing on this video. Thank you and have a good day.